We talked about the kings, Saul and David, and just let me remind you again a little bit about King David. Remember, he was called in a very special way. He came from low beginnings and he was exalted, and God is placing him in a difficult situation. First of all, he has to be a fugitive for many years, and then eventually he starts his own ministry, his own work in Hebron. He's made king. He established the kingdom in 2 Samuel 5-11. He fights with the Philistines, taking Jerusalem, and then you see further conquest in the chapters 8-10, and then we see what David is doing in chapters 9 and especially in 21. Not all of them are very good, but remember the fact that he had a illegitimate relationship, and out of that relationship children were born, and one of the boys that were born out of that relationship, although he was married at that time, a son was born, namely Solomon. And we've seen the difficulty with other sons of David, they claiming the throne, and but since David had promised the throne to Solomon, so he never comes back to his word, and that is what's happening. Of course, we don't have space for all of the different prophecies, the specific prophecies that were given according this time, and many are actually later on, because it's not just a prophecy being given and being fulfilled, and then we see the re-fulfillment in the kingdom and in the kingdom of Israel. Both Israel and Judah exist. They were brought together as one kingdom under King David, and after King David dies, his son Solomon ascends to the throne, and Solomon has it all. And let's start with this. Okay, we have the United Kingdom. Remember, we talked about it yesterday. So we are now on King Solomon, and like I said, Solomon has it all. He has a powerful kingdom to start with. That kingdom is inheritance, so he's inheriting the strong kingdom from his father. He has humility, he has wisdom, he has wealth, and it's all granted by God. Under his reign, the combined kingdoms, or the united kingdoms, the united tribes forming the kingdom, they grew more powerful than ever before, and they actually dominate the whole region of what is called the Fertile Crescent in that area. But, and that's the but with King Solomon, he, although he was so gifted, he had also his difficulties. For example, he lacked personal character. He lacked conviction. He was given wisdom, but he's not using it in the right way to honor God. And so we see that the kingdom is bit by bit sliding away. For example, Solomon has to give parts of the kingdom away as payment for his enormous deeds, enormous works that he's undertaking. We know of a whole range of things he did during his reign, not only the buildings, but also the job creating. But at the same time, with job creating, he's also creating a problem for the people there. They have to work for all men above, I think, 18 or 21. They have to work for an extended time of the year for the king. It's kind of a tax payment, payment in natural work, in things they have to do. And then you have the alliances he makes with the different kings around him. And of course, one thing that pops up from King Solomon is the many wives and the many concubines he has. And it's an absolute strange thing, and in lesser measure it also goes for King David. It's almost unbelievable how he can have multiple wives and even concubines on top of that. But what not happened with King David happens with King Solomon, and Solomon is actually backsliding from God. And the reason for that is the problem with the wives. The wives are taking him bit by bit away from the worship of the only God, Yahweh. And idols pop up in different places in the land. And although he is a wise king and he writes wonderful books, wonderful materials, and we can go into that for a very long time, and things have to be said about it, and we touch on a number of these materials he wrote in other courses, so I'm not going to repeat the issues here, but the wonderful things he wrote, Proverbs, Song of Songs, it is clear that he is there. He is the person that's behind Ecclesiastes, and it's 12 chapters long, but it speaks about who he is. So let's look at it. His life is being described in the book of Kings. Of course, he's a king. So you have First King, the chapters 2 and 3 are talking about him as establishing as a king. So David makes Solomon king. Like I said before, there is a difficulty there, because normally in our thinking anyway, is that the eldest son would become the king, but that is not what is happening here. The thing that is happening here is that someone from, let me say, the background is being promised the kingship. And that is not completely alien to the structure and the culture, but it's not something you normally do. So there is a specific reason, and the reason is in the background again, but in this case it is a spiritual background. The problem we see with King Solomon is not only that he is backsliding and going away from the worship of Yahweh, but eventually, although his name is mentioned in the genealogies, he's not the forefather of Jesus. It's not the forefather. And that is important because there are two genealogies, and one is going through King Solomon, and the other one, and that's the one that is in place, is going through Nathan. We talked about it. It's not the prophet, but it's the son of David, most probably named after the prophet. So we have chapters 2 and 3 of First King speaking about King Solomon. And in the first chapter, you see the problem with the other son of King David, Adonijah, and then that man is out of the picture there, and then you have Solomon in chapter 2 and 3 being chosen by David and being given the kingdom. And then, of course, he has to establish himself as a king. That's not easy after a king as King David. King David was a king for 40 years. So you can almost say everything he said, everything he did was being almost taken for granted. I mean, he was the king, and everything else was a lower level. And here we have King Solomon, and he starts out as a very, very good king. But, and that's the problem always with King Solomon, there's always a but. In chapter 3, we find that Solomon is asking God for wisdom. He's not asking for money. He's not asking for power. You have to understand the situation. Let's say this way: the money is already there, the power is already there, so he doesn't have to ask for it. So he asks for wisdom, and that is being granted to him. That wisdom, I wish I could say that wisdom was so spiritual that you can still feel it today. And in certain ways it's true. When you look at the material he left behind in writings, there is a spirituality, a strength, a strongness, but there's also a but. Because even in the text you will find that, well, he's not completely what he's supposed to be. He's comparing things, and yes, you can have explanations for it. It's not always there, the nice thing that pops up. So he is established as a king first. He asked for wisdom. That wisdom is given to him. And out of that wisdom, in chapter 5, he starts with building a temple. The provisions were made in the past by King David. That is not really that important, except King Solomon, he had not to look for the material, because the materials were there. And King David did not build the temple because it was not allowed by God to do so. But here we have a king, and he is allowed to build the temple. And he goes into confrontation with other kings, speaking about the temple, because he needs a lot of material, not so much the financial part, but things like, for example, the wood. You need to have an amount of wood. You need to have an amount of stone or bricks or marble. You need all those things. Certain things were prepared and other things were not completely prepared. So we have stories about Solomon interacting with kings around him. And then finally, in chapter 6, it says that King Solomon is building a temple. In the 480 years after the Israelites came out of Egypt. And I'm always amazed by the exactness of numbers in the Bible. It says exactly so many years. In the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziph, in the second month, he began to build the temple. The temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long. And again, you have detailing what God wants. So he built according to certain length, certain height, certain width. Now, the porticos has to be in that certain way, and the temple has to have an extended width, and with 20 cubits. You can all read it in chapter 6. The lowest floor was 5 cubits wide, and so on. Things we would not even think of passing on to a next generation, because there was no need to do so. But he is explaining exactly what it is, that temple, and the magnificence of the temple is popping out of it. And of course there are certain discussions about the numbers but the reality is that we have a very clear understanding of the temple. Next to the temple, he builds a palace. Already King David has a palace, but I don't know whether that's big enough. Well, let me say it this way. If you want to have 300 wives and 700 concubines, your palace is never big enough. And so he has to build bigger and bigger. In today's idea, it would be apartment blocks building up on top of each other. But seemingly that was not the idea that people had at that time. Of course, we are talking about royal families of the peoples around, and they would probably not be happy living on the 12th floor or something. So he built the temple, he built his palaces, and you can just go on, and then the temple is furnished. Things like, for example, in verse 27 of chapter 7, he also made movable stands of bronze. Each was 4 cubits long, 4 wide, and 3 high. So detailing what was done, what was given, and then speaking about panels, and then the ark is brought to the temple in chapter 8. So King Solomon summoned into his presence at Jerusalem the elders of Jerusalem, or sorry, the elders of Israel, all the heads of all the tribes and the chiefs of the Israelite families, to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. All the Israelites came to King Solomon at the time of the festival in the month of Etanim, that is the 7th month. When all the elders of Israel had arrived, the priests took up the ark, and they brought up the ark of the Lord and the tent of meeting and all the sacred furnishing in it. The priests and the Levites carried them, and King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel had gathered about before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and cattle that they could not record it or count it. The priests then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to the place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most high place, the Holy of the Holiest, and put it beneath the wings of the cherubim. The cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark and overshadowed the ark and its carrying poles. Like I said again, detailing and detailing. Let me say it this way: this is a remarkable story, actually. So clear, so direct, so specific. It is in itself, the detailing is so powerful, and that's what we find. And then we see the dedication, Solomon's prayer of dedication. We see a man dedicated to God, and it's difficult to understand, but that is the man the people of Israel, the elders of Israel, saw in their king. And it goes on, and then you have the dedication of the temple itself, and then the Lord appears to Solomon. The Lord said to him in chapter 9, verse 2, I have heard the prayer and the plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple, which you have built, by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there. God is renewing his covenant by saying, I am pleased with the temple. And for my part, for God's part, I will stay there forever. The reality we know out of history is different. But today, when you go to Jerusalem and you visit the Wailing Wall, part of the temple complex, excavations underneath is not being done. Well, partly not being done because of the fact that you could actually bump into the area which is called the holiest of the holiest, the most holy place, and when you enter the most holy place, which you are not allowed, and so on and so on. So that's what the people of Israel do today. So it has repercussions of what is happening today. Although strange things, like, for example, we are not talking about the same temple. The temple that is, the part that's still there in Jerusalem is not the temple we are talking about here, because that temple has been destroyed, been rebuilt, and being extended, and so on, and But in King Solomon time, you had this holy place, the place of the place where God lives, where He has His covenantal tablets sitting there. And he says, I agree with it. But there's always the agreement in a sense that, you know, there's always this problem, this ongoing and oncoming problem. So we have seen the king being established. We have seen Solomon built the temple. We have seen Solomon's kingdom. It's larger than, you can almost say it's larger than large, in the sense that it's the biggest that Israel ever would be. And the idea is to prepare the next generation for a smooth transition, and the people would accept the next king. But with King David being a warrior, not being allowed to build a temple, and then you have King Solomon, the wisest king ever lived, but the backsliding king. And then you have another one coming, the next generation, because of the decline and the misjudgment of King Solomon. Try to understand. You would live in the courts, and you will be the next king. What do you see your father doing? And I know, because I had an experience like that in the past, that I was to follow up someone, so I looked at him and I recorded. So what he did was I was supposed to do afterwards. So when I start doing exactly what the other one did, I was doing his mistakes. So the next generation always have a problem. Okay, so let's go to the next part. We had King Saul, King David, and now we have the king is established, the king's buildings, the king's the kingdom itself, the decline, the punishment. You can all read it in the first book of Kings, and I'm not going into that for a very long time, because we already touched on it. And so I think it is important for all of us to understand that what you have here is almost the whole of the reign of King Solomon. And I don't think you can say this is a beautiful thing. It started well, it ended bad. It starts with a good relationship with God, and it ends with I'm not saying a bad relationship, but a backslided relationship. So let's now look at the next thing that happens. Let me say it this way: King Solomon had a ill-chosen path to set the kingdom on the road, and there was no recovery afterwards. Because of the sins of Solomon, God announced that he would tear the kingdom away from him and give it to one of Solomon's subjects. You can find that in 1 Kings 11. Indeed, most of the kingdom would split away to follow a rival kingdom or a rival king. Only a minority was faithful to King Solomon's son, the son in line of King David. The prophecy was fulfilled only a few years later after Solomon's death, when most of the tribes broke away and followed Jeroboam, the leader of the northern kingdom Israel. The rest remained with Solomon's successor Rehoboam, leader of the southern kingdom Judah. Again, you can find that in 1 Kings 12 and in Chronicles 10 and 11. So the experiment of power of the great eastern kingdoms has ended in disaster for Israel. King Solomon created one of the wealthiest and mightiest, most powerful central government the Hebrews had ever seen, and has ever seen since then. But it was at an incredibly high cost. The land was given away to pay for the extravagances, and the people were sent into forced labor. When Solomon died, and that is not completely sure exactly when that happened, it was something like 926 to 922 BC. Then the 10 northern tribes refused to submit to his son and revolted. There should have been a smooth transition, because they had time enough to do so, and everything could have been prepared. But what do we see? We see just the opposite. We see a kingdom internally divided. King David had a similar problem. Remember, he cut the kingdom into 12 pieces, not equal to the 12 tribes. Misjudgment. David did it, Solomon did it, and his successor Rehoboam, he did it also. He made a terrible mistake by comparing himself to his father and overstating his cards. He was wrong in doing so, but the result was disastrous. The result was the cutting in two of the two kingdoms now. The United Kingdom became the divided kingdom. Through this, the southern and the northern kingdom, you know, it may sound a small thing, because you can always heal, but it never healed. But not only it never healed, it widened the chasm, the gap between the two. Because in the northern kingdom, there's no good king to find. In the southern kingdom, yes, we have some, and that's the reason why they stayed on for a longer time. But first, the northern kingdom, Israel. So there's a difference between Judah, where the name Jews comes from, and Israel. It's not the same thing. It's not actually, you can almost say it's not even the same people. But they were all part of the Israelite 12 tribes. But the cut was there. So in the north you had Samaria as the capital city, and in the south you had Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the capital city of Judah, and Israel as capital city Samaria. That sounds strange when you think about the New Testament, because it is, it's hardly mentioned there. The Jews look down to the Samaritans. Why? Well, there are certain reasons. The two kingdoms are not only split away from each other, they become each other's rivals, sometimes even each other's enemies. So, from being united, being cut into rivals, enemies. It's difficult to understand, But that is reality. You can look it up in the second book of Kings, chapter 16, in verse 5 and 6. So the kingdom is now divided. When you have a divided kingdom, the power that was once there isn't there anymore. By cutting it in two, now you have two small entities. Of course, you have the majority on one hand and the minority on the other hand. But what you have is even the majority is not strong enough to hold, because the geopolitical situation is not in favor of smaller kingdoms. You have the Assyrians, you have the Babylonians, you have the Egyptians. All of them wanted to have this stretch in between. So the pressure was from the south, the pressure was from the east, and the pressure was from the north. Well, those countries, they needed control. And the ones who are standing against that control were those two small kingdoms. They could not even agree with each other. And that is a difficulty. And that's why I said it's a danger of being small. Because the area was commercially and even military from the uttermost importance. When you have a situation like that, you create a problem. I'm living in a country that is called Belgium, that is called after Bel, that's Baal. So this is the land of the Baal. We are in between powerful enemies. On the east, we have Germany, the Germanic tribes, remember? And in the south, we have France, the Franken. And in the west, we have England. Of course, there's a sea in between, but England is there. So whenever the Germanic tribes want to fight, they came south and fought with the Frank. And when the Franks wanted to gain control, they tried to control what? The country we are living in, which is Belgium, the lower countries. The Spanish came, the Austrian came, the French came, the Germans came. You know, it's a story similar to what we see in Israel. So we know how it feels to be occupied, and one occupation after the other. Like I said, we had the Spanish, we had the Austrians, we had the Germans, we had the French, and then we had the Dutch. Eventually, we kicked out all of them. And now we are an independent country. We are going to celebrate our 200 years of independence in a few years. But in history, that's a very short time, 200 years. Because what we are talking now is in that time bracket, a few hundred years, from the year 1000 to the year 600, which is actually less than 400 years. And everything, whether what we talked about, is happening then and there. So what happens is that when you have a divided country, when you're small, you're prone to have strong enemies, and they come and they occupy your land. So what did the people of Judah did? they went to look for the people in Egypt to help them. But the Assyrians fought the Egyptians, won, and they had the king of Egypt being an Assyrian, a puppet king. And then the Assyrians were had a war with the Babylonians, and the Babylonians won. So you see, this is ongoing, and you as a small country are squeezed like a waffle iron in between. And that is what's happening. And that's the biggest problem at that time. And so Israel is eventually taken away by the Assyrians. What they do is they take the upper class and the middle class, and they take them away. They know that's all. That's the only thing you have to do. You don't have to take everyone. You just have to take all the powerful people, the rich people, all the financially well-to-do people. They take them away, and they disperse them all over their empire. They are not keeping them together. They are just dispersing them all over. Eventually, all of them will go under in that society, become wealthy, become idolaters as the Assyrians already are. And the Assyrians, they not only do this, but they also bring in Assyrian people and bring them into Samaria. First, they have their own gods, but what happens is that there is so much emphasis on this Yahweh God that they have, they have to abide by the let me say the mechanics that are functioning in the land, and so they accept Yahweh as one of the gods first, and finally, eventually, they will accept Yahweh as the only God. So what do we find here is that the conquest of Israel, the northern part, is being clearly done with a very good plan from the point of view of the Assyrians. They take away part, they put new people in there, and they melt with the group of people there. Those 10 tribes who are gone away, they will never return. Strangely enough, they will never return. So you could think that when you're Judah, you're living in Jerusalem, and you feel the pressure of the Assyrians coming, and they already occupy part of the Judean land. We know something is wrong, but they hold strong to the Lord God and to the temple and to Jerusalem. And that's, you can almost say, that is their salvation, at least for a time. So they are safe because of the fact that they are loyal to the Lord God himself. So what do we have is that God is faithful and is not blaming them, seemingly they are strong enough to keep the Assyrians away, probably with backing of other the other king from Egypt. What exactly happened there is very difficult. Like I said, the puppet king in Egypt is a puppet from Assyria, so there's a strange thing going on. But eventually the whole of Israel is gone, and Judah is looking and they have to see and say, what is this? Why is this happening? So they have to make, let me say, they have to make a report and look at all the consequences, and they see the report is bad. The reason for the badness of the report and the difficulty Israel is facing is the fact that they have loosened the tie with the Lord God himself. So Yahweh is not honored and not honored enough by the 10 tribes, so they are chased into exile. So you would say Judah would know beforehand, what is wrong, so they would not do that. Yeah, well, the problem with people is that they not always do it right. In I think 711, 701, the Assyrians take over, and then the next step is the Babylonians take control over Mesopotamia. Assyria is being lowered. The problem is just shifting, and in this case Babylonia has no time to do what the Assyrians did, and they come to Jerusalem and they find the king there. They take the king away, they put another king in place, and now the king of Jerusalem is Zedekiah, and that is in line with the practice of the Mesopotamian kings. Nebuchadnezzar deports 11,000 Jews to his capital city in Babylon. Again, the people that are being taken away are professionals, wealthy people, craftsmen, leaders, the leadership, the part of the royal family, and so on. Ordinary people are left alone because they cannot do anything. They cannot organize themselves. They are not used to do that. So this is the second part of the beginning of the exile. The story should have ended here, but Zedekiah defected from the Babylonians again, and so Nebuchadnezzar comes back with another expedition in 582 BC, conquered Jerusalem in 586. Of course, Zedekiah is captured, and Nebuchadnezzar kills the sons of Zedekiah in front of his eyes, and then he blinds the king and deports him to Babylon. This time again he takes captures, but not as many as before, something between 8 and 1500, 1600, we don't know exactly. But remember, in the 7th century BC, the prophet Isaiah, while speaking to King Hezekiah at that time, was the first to reveal a specific enemy, and would say to Judah, if you do this, you refuse to change, then behold, and I'm reading, behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and there shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So the prophecy was there. So they knew a thing like that would become if they would not be loyal to God. Eventually, Judah returns. There's a prophecy of 70 years, and after the 70 years, we know the story. The people are coming back. Israel was deported in the Assyrian Empire, but Judah was kept together, and In Jeremiah 29 we find the story that God says, after 70 years are completed in Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word toward you, and so on. And God says, thoughts of peace and not of evil, future and hope. And then he gives a whole list. Call upon me, pray to me, seek me, find me, search me. And if you do that, I will bring you back from captivity. And that is what happened. Even then, they were not independent. Only a short time in the 2nd century BC, there was independence for the nation. Before that, the Greeks came, and after the Greeks came the Romans, and that's where we pick up the story in the time of Jesus.